Hey everyone, Brian Zane here with another classic pay-per-view review as nominated by my Patreon backers. Well, come on in Slamboree and welcome to the Jamboree. It's time to crack open the vault that is WCW 2000 once again for Slamboree 2000. This took place on May 7th of that year at the Kemper Arena in Kansas City, Missouri. This show was nominated by Ken Taylor over on patreon.com/wrestlingwithregret. It is the final Slamboree in WCW history, and it's also the second pay-per-view under the Vince Russo, Eric Bischoff regime, the first one being Spring Stampede the previous month. And if the name of the venue sounds familiar to you, though this is not the first wrestling show to take place at the Kemper Arena since Owen Hart's untimely death in May of '99, this is the first pay-per-view to take place at the Kemper Arena since his passing. About 7,100 people filled the arena here. It's about halfway full. You'll see some embarrassing crowd shots as the night goes on. 65,000 pay-per-view buys, resulting in a .14 buy rate. Tony Schiavone, Scott Hudson, and Mark Madden are your commentary team for the evening. Now, back in April, like I said, the Russo-Bischoff regime took over not just backstage, but also on camera as well. They were the leaders of the New Blood, this group of young, hungry talent who felt they were being held down by the powers that be and by the older guard in WCW. That's important to note for a little bit later, but one of their first acts they did under this new regime was a mass stripping of all the championships. All the existing champions had to relinquish their belts, and the goal was they would all be won back at Spring Stampede. They'd all be on the line at least at Spring Stampede. The goal was for the New Blood to try and consolidate the gold, and they came very close to doing it, but there were a couple of rare exceptions to that, and I'll get to that when we get to those championships. And then the week before this particular show, Slamboree, we finally see the formation of the Millionaires Club, which is supposed to be the counter to the New Blood. It's the older, established veterans. You know, it's got Hulk Hogan, Ric Flair, Lex Luger, aka the Total Package, a lot of other people like that. Curt Hennig is also in the group as well. And it's very mind-boggling how this booking worked, because the whole narrative, the New Blood, is, you know, here are these young, hungry guys who've been held down, who are looking for a shot just at any kind of semblance of opportunity in WCW. All these old, overpaid, you know, has-been legends are just taking up airtime and holding us down. And mind-bogglingly, the New Blood were the heels. The Millionaires Club, all those out of past their prime, has-been wrestlers, whatever, the overpaid legends, they're the baby faces. It's just amazing how they would book that kind of story in WCW. But that was WCW in the year 2000. Up was down and black was white. Also, David Arquette had won the World Championship about 12 or 13 days before this pay-per-view. Amazing stuff. The show opens with a recap of Thunder the previous week when the Millionaires Club officially formed to take on the New Blood. Back live, we see the Millionaires Club rolling up in their bus in solidarity. No individual limos for these humble guys, and the New Blood look on backstage. Also in the New Blood locker room, you see Miss Elizabeth there. Just from her body language alone, you can tell she does not want to be there. Find out why later. I think you're going to like this story. The show begins the match with the Cruiserweight Championship as Chris Candido is accompanied by Tammy Lynn Sitch, aka Sunny, takes on the artist formerly known as Prince Iaukea, who's accompanied by Paisley and their terrible network music. Candido here with the weird Cruiserweight Championship. I don't know what the history of the story of this particular version of the belt is, but for a very brief time in 2000, the Cruiserweight title had this different look. Like, you know, it's different from what it was in like 97 to 99, and it's also different from what you saw when the belt was used in the Invasion storyline the next year in the World Wrestling Federation. This very weird alternate look that, you know, Candido wears and then like Daphne wears later on. I just don't know why they made this different looking belt. It's very strange to me. Anyway, Tammy wants to show off in the show me state, but Candido's against it. Artist with the offense early on gets vaulted over the top rope onto the floor. Fighting on the ramp, strikes are exchanged in the ring. Candido's suplexed from the inside of the ring to the floor. Always looks gnarly to me. Artist counters a backdrop attempt into a sloppy looking powerbomb. Candido goes for a top rope Hurricane Rana, but the artist blocks it. He then goes for a top rope Schoolboy, which is cool in theory, but they don't connect very well. We get kind of a 2 count from that sloppy move. The artist at the top rope Samoan drop. Tammy gets on the apron and complains to the referee, and Paisley interjects. Tammy grabs a chair and waylays on the artist's head. That did not look very good. We get a very close 2 count, but then they call it off. They actually ring the bell and the music plays, but the referee waves it off, and it was a very late get up from the artist anyway. Also, the fact that that he kicked out of a chair shot to the head, even though it wasn't a great looking one, that still should have been a finish. But, it wasn't. The match actually goes on for all of like 30 more seconds. Chris follows it up with a pile driver and a diving headbutt, so he wins the match for reals this time and retains the Cruiserweight Championship. That was a really rough finish. It's a match that starts out kind of rough to begin with and then just does not improve as time goes on. The botches compound and everything gets worse and worse. The valet involvement was not that great between either Tammy or Paisley, and the finish was a whole dang clusterfuck. But if you look closely, there are some slivers of an actual match taking place as this thing goes on. After the match, Paisley lightly shoves Tammy down on her ass. She hits Candido with a very bad low blow. The artist grabs Tammy by the hair, and he and Paisley strip Tammy's dress off, and the heels run away. I can't wait for Tammy and Chris to drop the Cruiserweight Championship to Crowbar and Daphne very soon after this. We get a highlight package of Terry Funk suffering a lot of brain damage, and then we go to the Hardcore Championship match as Funk defends against Norman Smiley and a mystery partner to be revealed. Like I mentioned at the top of this review, the New Blood's whole plan at Spring Stampede was to consolidate all the gold for themselves. Terry Funk was, I think, the lone dissenter, was the lone exception to that plan, that mission, by winning the Hardcore Championship at the pay-per-view, and has been fighting ever since. Middle-aged and crazy, they call Terry here. And so, yeah, he's supposed to be fighting in a handicap match with Norman and the mystery partner. The match begins with Terry making his way through the backstage area, asking some crew members where Norman is, and they all gesture to the bathroom area. So he barges in the bathroom, kicks open the stall door, and out pops this guy in an umpire's mask. You can't tell who it is. Funk thinks it's Norman, and then actually in comes the real Norman Smiley with a fire extinguisher to break things up. Norman is in full Royals gear, by the way, to celebrate the Kansas City crowd. They brawl through the back, and the mystery partner kind of joins in. Funk gets the hell beat out of him. Norman does a dance, and they're tearing down the interview set. Get away from there, Mean Gene. The mystery partner lobs cardboard boxes from atop a pile of rolled up AstroTurf, but Funk just throws chairs back at him. The trash can shots do nothing. Funk shoves Norman off the ladder and through a table. Funk goes for a cover, but the mystery partner just stands there, not helping his partner at all. What is this? Shivani with this great call saying either he has no clue or he's completely blown up. It's probably a little bit from column A and column B, honestly. And really the best part of this match is that the commentary team just rips the shit out of this mystery partner, how useless and ineffective he is. Even Mark Madden is tearing into the guy, and I don't wish Mark Madden to do any good calls ever, but he actually has some good gems in this particular matchup. At one point, the mystery partner tries to clatter Funk in the head with some trash can shots, and Funk with this amazing deadpan sell, just does not want to register the damage at all. It's so funny. Finally, he grabs the mystery partner, who Scott Hudson refers to as a big useless lump, and takes him to the ringside area, beating him up and unmasking him along the way. And who is it? It's Ralphus! And I forget if it was Shivani or Hudson who said this, but he said, of course it's Ralphus. Yes, of course it's Ralphus. It's WCW in the year 2000. Of course it's Ralphus. Anyway, Terry pantses Ralphus in the ring. It's a big laugh. Norman finally makes a save on him, though. Norman with a chair shot to the head, followed by just hucking a ladder at Funk's head. Jesus Christ, no thank you forever and a day. Smiley with another chair shot and a big wiggle. Funk looks to try and do a reverse chair shot, but Norman catches it and hits him again. Ralphus does the big wiggle now. Funk's reverse chair shot works this time. It's kind of a long way to go for what's essentially a cutoff. Funk beats the hell out of Ralphus and Norman with the chair. Funk rolls up Norman and wins. Thank God this match is over. I'm going to give this one star out of 4. On every conceivable level, this match is worse. Far worse than the opener we just saw with Candido and the Artist. But you know what? This match was a blast to watch because it was so damn funny, so I got to give it something. After the match, Norman and Ralphus stop their selling and celebrate their loss. The dance, of course. Then we go to backstage where we see Mean Gene interviewing WCW champion David Arquette. Gene wants to know, why is David not rolling with the Millionaires Club? Courtney Cox, $1 million an episode. What's going on? And Arquette says that he came alone because DDP says he's not a sports entertainer. He's trying to prove himself, and he says he's very scared about his predicament tonight. Up next, a match to see who the real perfect one is in WCW as Curt Hennig takes on Perfection, Shawn Stasiak, the former meat in the World Wrestling Federation, whose Instagram account I honestly find incredibly fascinating. Hennig with an interesting look here in this match because he's wearing his black and white singlet, but underneath you can clearly see his yellow singlet is under this. The straps are sticking out from under the white and black straps. I have no idea why he's trying to pull that look off there. About a half hour into the show, we finally get some actual good-looking wrestling in this. We actually get a good exchange of holds and working around and chain wrestling and stuff. It's very nice. Misfits in action are at ringside. Chavo Guerrero, Lash LaRue, Van Hammer. They've all been fired in kayfabe, yet they've still been getting involved in matches, like fired wrestlers often do. Stasiak chokes Hennig with some cords on the outside, a diving clothesline in the ring. Hennig wants to go for a slam, but his back is hurt. Shawn locks in the sleeper. He takes him down, goes for a top rope cross body, but Curt moves. Shawn slingshots Curt into the corner. Shawn hits the Hennigplex on Hennig and scores the 3. Yes, Shawn Stasiak, the man who ripped off Mr. Perfect's gimmick in the first place, scores a 100% clean victory on Hennig with Hennig's own finishing move. Also, what the hell's going on with the acoustics of that ring?
Oh, look at that! 1, 2, it's his own nobody beat him with it!
I give this match 2 stars out of 4. I put it right in the middle in terms of match quality, basically. It's a good, solid match. It's one of the only ones the entire night with absolutely zero interference, which is kind of refreshing. And like I mentioned, very nice to see some proper wrestling going on at this point in the show. I think Shawn looks really good here in this, what I consider to be an upset win against Curt Hennig. I just wish, and this is going to be a recurring thing as the night goes on, I really wish that Shawn could have been his own character instead of what was essentially a Mr. Perfect ripoff. Backstage, Vince Russo's working to psych up the troops. Scott Steiner, I think, tells Russo to keep his hands off him, but I couldn't really make it out because the audio quality was so bad. Then we go to the U.S. Championship match. Up next, as Big Papa Pump, Scott Steiner, alongside Medeja and Shakira, his freaks, takes on Hugh Morris. Apparently this match was supposed to involve Booker T, but apparently he got injured or kayfabe injured or something, so Hugh Morris was the replacement. First thing Hugh Morris does when he gets in the ring, he grabs the microphone and says, "Don't call me Hugh Morris. That name was a brain fart. It's a joke. Makes me look stupid. So call me by my real name, Hugh G. Rection." Fuck me, how do you say that with a straight face? How could you say Hugh Morris was a dumb name? Now let me give you an even dumber name and also pass it off as my real name. I could do a whole thing about the Misfits in Action and Hugh Morris and Hugh G. Rection. Oh, by the way, in this point, he is Captain Hugh G. Rection. He is promoted to General, though, later on in the storyline. So at least there's that going for him. He'll be General Rection later on. But yeah, Hugh G. Rection. That's my real name. Steiner powders early on. The freaks get on the apron to distract Morris, Mr. Rection, and Big Papa Pump takes advantage. Morris, Hugh G. Rection is back on top, hits a top rope elbow, but he's not done yet. As he goes up again, Steiner grabs the referee and the lady's crotch. Rection on the top turnbuckle. He falls into the tree of woe. Scott works him over some more, and at this point in the match, from here on out, every 2 count that Steiner gets over his opponent, he just immediately gets up and gets right in the referee's face because he's so heated by what he thinks is a slow count. Rection tries to fight out of a bear hug, but Scott just fucks him over his head. Morris comes back after a boot out of the corner, goes for some corner avalanches, but Steiner hits him with a line. Steiner with a big old suplex, goes for a tombstone, but Mr. Rection reverses it. He ignores the freaks on the apron, goes for a moonsault. Steiner tries to roll out of the way, but in doing so gets his head just damn near decapitated by Hugh Morris's legs, or Captain Rection's legs, or whatever the fuck his name is. Basically, it's a scary looking bump here where his legs hit the back of Steiner's head. What is with that, with wrestlers not rolling toward the corner out of the moonsault? Between Stomping Grounds, which I watched on Sunday, and then Slamboree the next day, I saw 2 back-to-back shows with a spot where a wrestler tries a moonsault, the wrestler on the ground tries to get out of the way, but in doing so gets accidentally hit by the legs. And that's always scary to me, especially with Steiner's one here. Tucker hitting Daniel Bryan on Sunday didn't look nearly as bad as what Hugh Morris or General Rection, or whatever the fuck his name is, hitting Scott Steiner with this particular moonsault. Anyway, Steiner is able to avoid, or is able to survive the possible decapitation, gets Hugh G. Rection in the Steiner recliner to win the match. The match is finally over. I give this one 1 star as well. It was a very clunky match. The ladies getting involved was very excessive, repeatedly hurting the flow, and God, that moonsault near the end was absolutely horrific. After the match, the MIA hop the barricade and try and get in the ring, but R&B security, that's Russo and Bischoff security, stop them. Booker T runs in with some weird music. He gets Steiner out of the ring. He celebrates with with Captain Rection in the ring. This is actually marked the beginning of Booker T as G.I. Bro, kind of like a satellite member of the Misfits in action. He will not be that character for very long, but that is a whole story for another time. Backstage, Kanyon explains in an interview why he backed his friend Diamond Dallas Page in the Millionaires Club instead of going with the New Blood, and he says, you make it in this business by not kissing ass, but by busting your own. He's going to show that when he goes against Mike Awesome up next. Chris Champagne Kanyon takes on Mike Awesome, veteran of the classic review segment as of late. He's been powerbombing fools left and right the last couple of weeks, not just Kanyon, but Hulk Hogan as well on more than one occasion. Not quite the fat chick thriller or that 70s guy Mike Awesome just yet. The action starts out fast and furious. Awesome with a dive to the outside early. Kanyon makes a comeback, hits a rolling senton off the apron. On commentary, Schiavone puts over Kanyon really big as far as his involvement in the making of Ready to Rumble. Talks about how he was Oliver Platt's stunt double and how he was also the wrestling advisor. So nice of Schiavone and the company to put Kanyon over and really and recognize his work in that movie. It's not the last time we'll be hearing about Ready to Rumble on this night though. Oh, by no means. Awesome with a huge diving clothesline off the top, hits Kanyon with the chair on the outside, choking him with some cables, back in the ring, back out of the ring, more chair whomping by Awesome. Mike goes the top rope with the chair, but Kanyon crotches him. Big hangman's noose and a swinging neck breaker. Mike kicks out. Kanyon goes for another move, but Awesome counters the Alabama slam and a very high angle powerbomb on Kanyon. Jesus Christ, that looks scary. Awesome peels the padding back on the floor, teases the Awesome bomb to the outside a couple of times, but Kanyon fights out of it. They make their way to the ramp. Awesome signals for a powerbomb, but then Kevin Nash's music plays. The crowd pops huge for it. Nash begins fighting Awesome. The bell is rung, by the way. The match has been thrown out. More New Blood members run in, and Nash gets beat down. Ric Flair and Sting show up to even the odds, and the Millionaires Club beat up the New Blood and R&B security, and they stand tall. I give this one 2.5 stars out of 4. Despite the DQ finish at the end, the big schmoz ending, I still consider this to be the best match of the night so far in terms of action and overall pacing. So yeah, the match is still pretty strong here. It advances the storyline between the Millionaires Club and the New Blood. It's just too bad the next match is going to take things down a couple notches. And that match is up next as Buff Bagwell takes on the total package Lex Luger. So what's the big hook to this match other than the obvious New Blood Millionaires Club dynamic? Well, it's the fact that Miss Elizabeth is Vince Russo's property. He owns Miss Liz, bro. Ugh. So basically, through promos, we learned that as the de facto head of WCW, as person in charge of creative, Russo technically owns Liz's contract, so he just up and takes her from Luger's side. It's just the whole people as property thing is pretty fucking gross. She's even like tethered to Russo and stuff like this. You know, I begin to think Vince Russo was really misunderstood as a writer. And even though you're supposed to feel sympathy for Luger in this storyline, it's really hard to embrace him at this point as a babyface, especially with his current gimmick, because it's basically a derivative of the narcissist gimmick from the 90s, where he comes out, he takes off his like workout clothes, he has this very dramatic music, almost like Chris Masters would later get, where he just kind of poses and flexes and shows off his body, showing no emotion on his face at all. Yeah, that screams babyface. Let's cheer for this brooding, disgustingly chiseled giant man, especially in juxtaposition with Buff Bagwell, who, even though he's acting like a supreme douche this entire time, at least he looks like he's enjoying himself. The two open with a pose off, of course. Bagwell gets the early advantage out of the corner, continues to pose. Luger gets his shots in, the action goes to the outside. Back into the ring, Bagwell gets a chinlock on total package for a very long time. Luger works his way back up, we get a double shoulder tackle. Bagwell working the camel clutch. Luger gets a brief moment of hope. Then all of a sudden we cut to backstage where Russo tells Liz to come and watch the best part. Liz knocks the chair back so Russo falls on his ass, bonks him in the leg with a bat. Great sell by Russo there. Luger makes a fiery comeback as Liz makes her way to ringside. She goes to attack Buff with a bat, but he blocks it. He hits Luger with it. He goes to the blockbuster, but then Liz grabs the bat back, hits Bagwell in the arm from behind, torture rack, Bagwell taps, Luger wins. Boring, boring, boring. I give this match 1 star out of 4. It's just two body guys who historically have always needed somebody on a different level, a different style to work around them, to make them look good in the ring. But you put them together and the match just does not work. We've seen this before in WCW. These guys had wrestled before and it wasn't good then. It doesn't get any better as time goes on and their bodies are slower and more broken down. Then right after the match, Chuck Palumbo appears. He beats down Luger with the Lex Flex. It's a relative newcomer. They put him over as someone who's been part of the power plant, so he's very new. And you see him wearing Lex Luger's exact gimmick. The trunks with like the logo. It's supposed to be for like Luger's gym. Oh goody, another copycat gimmick. You know, it only makes sense that Palumbo and Stasiak are going to be a tag team after this as the perfect event because they're stealing other people's gimmicks to get themselves over. I would be far more accepting though of Palumbo ripping off Luger's shtick if his physique were anything like Lex Luger's. It looks like Luger's little brother trying on his trunks. It's embarrassing. Honestly, I think it would have made a lot more sense if Stasiak and Palumbo switched gimmicks. So Palumbo got the Mr. Perfect gimmick and Stasiak had the Lex Luger gimmick because at least in terms of physique, Stasiak's physique is far closer to Luger's than Palumbo's. We then go backstage where Gene Okerlund interviews Shane Douglas about his beef with Ric Flair. He said he's sick and tired of Flair's BS. He's going to retire him once and for all. Oh, how little he knows. The franchise gets ready for his match with Ric Flair up next. And by the way, no matter what happens, win or lose, Flair is going to get 5 minutes alone with Vince Russo in the ring after this match. Important for later. So these guys do have a legitimate long-standing beef going back several years, going back to when Douglas was working as part of the Dynamic Dudes in WCW and Flair was the booker of WCW at the time. And yeah, a lot of bad blood based on booking and how things were going for that. So Douglas has had a beef with Flair ever since, and Flair doesn't like Douglas doesn't like Flair, and it just festers in this like vicious cycle, making it worse and worse. So technically this match probably has the best, most amount of heat going into it out of anything else going on in this show. And they do play up the legitimate beef they have with each other, but you know, it's just so bogged down and mired in all this, you know, minutia of New Blood versus Millionaires Club. It really doesn't come through that much in this matchup. Flair shows up not dressed to wrestle at all, which I think was his gimmick at the time. I think he was just wearing street clothes when he wrestled at this point. Flair on the mic, he calls Shane a dipshit. He's going to kick his ECW ass. We had some good headlocks to start off, some chops exchanged. Flair goes to the top and gets flared off by Shane. Mark Mann with the call of the night on commentary saying it was the 2,459th time that Flair went to the top and got thrown off. Even a blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. Shane puts Flair in the figure four, and fucking hell, can we please stop with the ripoffs and the constant copying of gimmicks in order to get heat? This was the biggest problem with the New Blood. Full stop. Their whole thing was, hey, we're young and we're new and we're a breath of fresh air, we're taking over. And what do all the big players in the New Blood do? Steal other people's gimmicks. You've got Shane Douglas doing the figure four here to Flair. You've got Shawn Stasiak ripping off Mr. Perfect. You've got Chuck Palumbo ripping off Lex Luger. You're gonna have Kanyon ripping off Diamond Dallas Page later in this year. It's really difficult to present yourself as the new anything when all you do is cop other people's stuff. All it does is remind the audience of the bigger, more successful thing you're trying to rip off, and it makes you seem like a lesser than. If you're trying to promote yourself as this new, fresh alternative, don't steal the established people's shit. Flair using his Jedi mind tricks on Charles Robinson to get him to look the other way as he hits a huge low blow on Douglas. Fighting on the outside, Flair's all over Shane here. Back in the ring, Shane suplexes Flair and puts some mustard on it on the way down. The velocity of that descent. He pulls a chain out of his boots and decks Flair with it. Shane with 3 consecutive suplexes, 1 a hanging suplex. Flair gets his second win, which involves multiple low blows. Flair goes to the figure four. Buff Bagwell comes running down. As the referee is distracted by that, out comes a man dressed as Sting, presumed to be Vince Russo. He decks Flair with a bat. Shane pins and wins over Ric Flair. Shane and Buff beat down Flair. They all go to leave, and Flair calls out Russo, or who he thinks is Vince Russo, and he gets ready to beat him down. Out comes the real Vince Russo, and the fake Sting hits Flair with what Madden refers to as a miniature Statue of Liberty. Very good eyes by Madden there. I wouldn't have guessed that. And the mask comes off, and it's David Flair, the son of Rick.
Don't do it, Dad.
Why did he stop?
What the hell are you doing? Paying you back.
They beat down Flair. Kevin Nash comes out to make the save once again, but Daphne shows up and helps the beatdown. Russo, the younger Flair, and Daphne all celebrate together, and that's where it ends. I'm going to give this one 2 stars out of 4. Match itself was decent. It was by no means the best performance out of either guy, but hopefully they got their grudge and all their heat with each other out of the way after this matchup, at least to some extent. The post-match schmoz, it was what it was. It was a means to an end. This would give us, actually, this partnership between David Flair and Vince Russo would would give us one of the more classic moments of WCW in this year when there's this great segment where Russo and David and Daphne all go to Flair's house in Charlotte, North Carolina, and like they're trying on his robes and Daphne's jumping on their bed. There's causing chaos, and at one point Flair's wife and kids come back out of the house, and Russo and David confront them and everything, and one of the people they're getting in the face of is a young Ashley Flair who'd become Charlotte. So technically, the Queen, Charlotte Flair, debuted in WCW. Up next, Sting takes on Vampiro, and for weeks now, Vamp's been playing lots of sadistic mind games with the Stinger, including dragging him down under the ring, covering him with red viscous fluid from the top of the arena, beating him up in a graveyard, hitting him with a fake-looking foam tombstone, the works. The match begins on the ramp here. Sting gets the first shot with his bat. It's one of the 1,800 bat shots you see on this night. They fight on the outside. Vamp hits a low blow, also one of the 1,800 of those we see throughout the course of the show. He attacks Sting with a lead pipe repeatedly, but the fans cheering Sting on is getting into Vampiro's head. Sting finally answers back with a low blow of his own and a terrible-looking powerbomb off the second turnbuckle. Sting lights up Vampiro with the lead pipe, selling absolutely none of the beating he just received. 2 Stinger splashes, 1 with the pipe, 2 straight Scorpion death drops. Sting pins and wins in decisive fashion. He goes to leave the ring, but decks Vampiro one more time for good measure. Then you see this huge wide shot of the arena. Why would you show half the empty arena right there in that shot, guys? Come on, people. I give this match 2 stars out of 4. It's not a bad match. I just think the story was really condensed and told in a very, very short form. At 6.5 minutes thereabouts, this is the shortest match on the show by far. It's a relatively clean match if you don't include the lead pipe as part of it being dirty or clean or whatever, because weapons are being used willy-nilly all the time with no punishment here. It is one of the only 2 matches on the show, along with Hennig and Stasiak earlier, where there is no interference. So at least they got that going for him. Of course, this feud would carry on for many more months at this point, including the Human Torch match, this infamous moment where a Sting stunt double gets covered in flames, takes a big old dive off the set onto some crash pads. Backstage, Mike Tenay interviews Diamond Dallas Page and WCW World Champion David Arquette, and Tenay says, "David, this could be the end of your acting career, this matchup here." Page repeats the plan to David: stay out of Jarrett's way, and if anyone else gets involved, climb to the top and fend them off. We'll see how that plays into the match later on. We see a shot of Kevin Nash stalking the backstage area looking for Vince Russo. Then we go back to Mike Tenay, where he's interviewing Billy Kidman as he gets ready for his match with Hulk Hogan. And he says, "With Eric Bischoff as the referee of the match, I can't lose." Bischoff says it's going to be a great night for the New Blood, and we go to that match up next as Billy Kidman takes on Hulk Hogan. Yes, folks, you heard that right. Hulk Hogan had a multi-week feud with Billy Kidman, the multiple-time Cruiserweight champion. This was one of the more memorable angles of the New Blood storyline, probably for the wrong reasons, because it was one of those things where it's like, we got to get Hulk Hogan fighting a young guy. Who are we going to get? Let's get Billy Kidman, this guy who's exclusively worked with Cruiserweights almost the entire time in WCW, for him to ramp up and just immediately go to one of the biggest names in pro wrestling, Hulk Hogan. Not only did it really, I think, hurt Hogan's stock in this feud, it also, I think it was just too much too soon for Kidman, because I think it's one of those things where I could buy Kidman as a believable threat to somebody, or really you can buy anyone as a believable threat to somebody if the build is there. But Kidman's ascent from going just feuding with Cruiserweights and mid-card guys to all of a sudden Hulk Hogan, so drastic and so quick, it was really hard for anyone to buy into what they were seeing here. During the build of this feud, Kidman has scored 3 dirty wins over Hogan in a row, so he's 3-0 now on Hulk Hogan, going for a 4th here at the pay-per-view. Hogan, meanwhile, is kind of adopted, I guess you could call it kind of a pseudo Dark Side Hogan gimmick here, where he's coming out with biker gear, and he's got the letters FUNB on his stuff. Fun B, FU New Blood is what it stands for, just rolls off the tongue. He is making his way to the ring with his nephew Horace Hogan here, but Bischoff immediately ejects Horace, sends him back. We can't go more than 15 seconds after the bell rings before these two fuck up. Then afterward, Kidman goes for a sunset flip, and Hogan just picks him up and crotches him on the top rope. Hogan drops Kidman ribs first onto a chair. Kidman hits Hogan with a Hurricane Rana and a drop kick, and Hogan powders. Never seen Hogan sell like this before. Hogan comes back, whips Kidman with the weight belt. Bischoff stops Hogan, and that allows Kidman to hit Hogan back with the belt. Hogan hip tosses Kidman right out of the ring. It's a very impressive bump. Hogan goes for a cover, but Bischoff is in no way willing to administer the count. Again, 2 shows in a row I've watched where there's a guest referee who is not wanting to help out the babyface. What a shock. Kidman using his quickness and resiliency to keep getting the advantage on Hogan. Hogan hulks up, hits the big boot, goes for the leg drop, but Bischoff stops him. Hogan dinks Bischoff and hits the leg drop anyway. Bischoff grabs a chair and goes to hit Hogan, who stops him and hits him back. Hogan brings out a table. He sets it up and looks to powerbomb Bischoff when Kidman hits him from behind with the chair and again on the head. Hogan kicks out of that one. Bischoff grabs Hogan. Kidman goes to swing the chair once again. Hogan boots him, low blows Bischoff, powerbombs him through a damn table. Kidman hits another low blow and another chair shot. Kidman puts Hogan on a table, is going to go for a splash, but Hogan moves and Kidman just flattens the table. Hogan pins Kidman. Horace returns and makes Eric's unconscious body count the 3. Hogan defies the odds and wins here. Certainly an interesting concept to see Hogan sell so much for Kidman, but also on the flip side, seeing Kidman give so much to Hogan as well. Really just got bouncing off him when Hogan was getting his heat. Was very impressive. And so Kidman would not be a heel for very long after this angle. He would start feuding with Shane Douglas, and then that would lead to Torrie Wilson turning on Kidman, joining Shane and stuff. And so that was pretty much it. This was like the big high point for Kidman in the year 2000, was his feud with Hogan, as maligned as it is. And like I said, you can have a story where a plucky young up-and-comer goes against a legend like that. I'm not saying it's an impossible storyline, but that kind of angle needs build in order for it to be believable and credible, and Kidman just didn't get that luxury. And so, yeah, there's a reason that it's kind of a pan storyline and why it was so farcical for Kidman and Hogan to be feuding, because no one had any right to believe Kidman really stood a chance. Outside the arena, Vince Russo tries to escape with Liz. He opens the door to a bus, and Lex Luger happens to be inside. You big dummy, Vince, that's the bus for the Millionaires Club. So Liz runs into the bus and is safe in Mr. Package's arms as Russo frantically escapes by stealing a guy's car, and Kevin Nash is watching. Main event time, the triple cage match for the WCW Championship as David Arquette defends against Diamond Dallas Page and Jeff Jarrett in a match so huge that Arquette was nowhere to be found on the promotional material for this show or on the VHS cover after it was released on home video. Let's talk about Ready to Rumble, that cinematic classic that came out in the year 2000, a big tie-in with WCW. I've talked about it at length before, one of the first episodes I ever did. You can check it out right here. And so Arquette, the star of the picture, is brought onto Nitro to help promote the movie, and also on Nitro, Diamond Dallas Page regained the championship from Jeff Jarrett. And so then, of course, Jarrett won that belt at Spring Stampede as part of the New Blood's big mission. On Thunder, after Page won the belt back, Jarrett and Bischoff hold Arquette hostage and say they want a shot at the title with DDP. It's a tag team match where Jarrett and Bischoff team up against Page and Arquette. Long story short, Arquette wins the world championship and makes the entire internet world basically explode / laugh / weep. It's just so many different feelings going on with Arquette winning the championship here. It is considered one of Vince Russo's biggest flops, one of his Waterloos running WCW. And I understand that, this wasn't Vince's idea. Turns out Tony Schiavone is the one who actually pitched the idea for Arquette to win the championship. And so, yeah, Vince Russo doesn't get credit for actually creating the idea, but as the head of creative, he is the one who has the final stamp of approval on it, so it still is technically his baby. It was designed to get ratings, get people to watch the pay-per-view and the TV show. That didn't really work. And also, I imagine, if you want to try and sell the movie and try and hype up the movie, and that's why you have David Arquette winning the championship on your show, then the least you could have done is schedule that to happen before the film was already out for weeks. By this point, Ready to Rumble was out for 3 weeks in theaters. Now, 3 weeks, by that point, that's death for any movie. Unless you're a huge cinematic blockbuster, 3 weeks in, you're not going to be making a whole lot of your money back. And so if they had decided to do this kind of tie-in either at the same time or a little before Ready to Rumble came out, I could see how you justify it. But 3 weeks late is just, it's so WCW. Again, I can't believe WCW went under with all these just brilliant decisions they made. This match does get the Michael Buffer treatment beforehand. Arquette, who's in his best Elvis-like gear, kind of hangs back while Page and Jarrett do all the heavy lifting in this matchup. At one point, he does go for a top rope splash on Jarrett, but he eats shit. Outside the ring, Page whips Jarrett right into Arquette, takes a punch from Jarrett about a minute later as well. For someone who's not a wrestler, he's taking a lot of damage here in this match. Page and Jarrett try to climb a ladder through a trap door that will take them to the second level. At one point, Page powerbombs Jarrett off the ladder and throws him into it multiple times. Page is the first one to make it to the second level, the hardcore cage they call, or hardcore hell. They really go back and forth with that. Weapons are strewn about on level 2. Jarrett grabs a chair, begins to whomp Page with it. Both men are bleeding. Jarrett makes the climb climb to the third cage, but DDP stops him. Page drives himself and Jarrett through the cage wall, and it collapses. Page slams Jarrett through a table on the cage. Looks very precarious and scary. They fight on the top of the main cage. I love how they also have different names for these top two levels. There's the hardcore hell, then there's the guitar room, then the shrine of the silver monkey. David Arquette climbs the cage. Mike Awesome shows up out of nowhere and beats up Page. Arquette goes to the very top of the structure, just below the championship, kind of guarding it, camping it, you might say. Diamond Cutter on Mike Awesome. DDP and Jarrett race up to the top floor and fall into the guitar room. Each man misses a swing with their short braid guitars. I love how they just dissolve on impact there. That's great. Both men are climbing again. Arquette has one of the guitars. He teases he's going to hit Jarrett, but swerve, bro. He hits Diamond Dallas Page. Jarrett hits Page one more time for good measure, and for some reason that one really makes me laugh. It's the ultimate swerve, as Shivani says, as Jarrett grabs the championship and wins. You know what? I'm going to give this one 3 stars out of 4. I think it is probably it's the one match in this show I recommend anyone watching if they're curious. Like, here's the one match you got to see. Aside maybe from Funk versus Norman Smiley and Ralphus for completely different reasons. But this one has the most action. It's paced pretty well. No one really fucks up, and it probably just tells the best story overall. Right after the match, Awesome recovers, goes to throw DDP off the cage when Kanyon shows up to make the save for his friend once again, and Awesome throws Kanyon off the top of the main cage onto the ramp below, leaves a huge canyon-shaped crater on the ramp, and the announcers are going nuts. They're freaking out over what they saw here, and that's pretty much how the show ends. It's an insane visual, a crazy stunt, and it's just really, crazy way to end the show. I would say it's a little bit tasteless to have this insane thing happening in the same building, and 1 year almost to the day where another crazy stunt ended in a wrestler dying in the ring. That's kind of debatable though. I mean, I'm sure other people have thoughts about that, but that's pretty much how the show ends. Arquette with the ultimate swerve, turns heel, is hanging out with Jarrett and Bischoff after this for a little bit. For as much of a debacle as the Arquette championship run was, it's worth pointing out Arquette never really wanted to be champion. He was pretty much kind of forced into it to try and help out the company and help out Rated Rumble promotion. And, he did famously donate his earnings in WCW to the families of Owen Hart and Brian Pillman. So he's a very good dude for that. Also, lest we forget, right now in 2019, Arquette is back in the indie scene. Like, he's been wrestling for over a year now in the indies. He's in shape. He's like making the towns. He's putting in big bumps. He's like really working hard out there. So I think it's really cool, kind of redemption story for Arquette in a way, as a man who was so reviled by fans and people in the industry for so long for what he did in WCW, even though it wasn't his fault, it wasn't his call. For him to kind of I think he's kind of paying it forward a bit by coming back into wrestling and doing things like the right way almost 20 years later. It's a really nice story for Arquette. My final grade for WCW Slamboree 2000 is a D+. Is this show better than Halloween Havoc 2000? Yeah. Is it better than Bash at the Beach 2000? Oh, hell yes. But unfortunately, not quite good enough to get out of the D zone in terms of grades for me. The things I liked about this show, kind of few and far between, and one's kind of like an asterisk. Like the Hardcore Championship match with Terry Funk and Norman Smiley and Ralphus is so bad it's good. Like, if you want a good laugh, watch that match, because it is absolutely bonkers. Just like Ralphus standing there like a doof, not knowing what to do. Some of the stuff that Funk and Norman are doing, it's just like, it's such an outrageous match. And it's so, yeah, it's a terrible match, but it's so funny and you can't look away from it. Awesome versus Kanyon was probably the best mid-card match of the night. And the Triple Cage match as a main event, as a spectacle, was pretty high up there, and was actually not a bad main event at all. Like DDP and Page, like by themselves, working with the cage around them, and occasionally David Arquette getting involved too. Like, it was a very overbooked thing, but it was still an entertaining matchup, and it was probably the best story told out of anything on the night so far. And then just everything else in the show was just like meh at best. The worst things for me were Candido and the Artist in the opening match, Luger and Bagwell, the non-stop interference except for all but 2 matches, and just the concept of we're introducing all this new blood stuff with Stasiak and Palumbo and just the new blood in general, and just how much they rip off the old things. And like, it's not a good way of getting heat. All it does, like I said, is it reminds people of the thing you are trying to, rally against. It's completely counterintuitive. Well, I hope you enjoyed my review of Slamboree 2000. Thanks once again to Ken Taylor for picking this one out for me. If you want to play a role in determining which shows I review, be they good, bad, or somewhere in between, go to patreon.com/wrestlingwithregret, become a $10 backer or above, and you'll have the chance to nominate classic shows for me to review in the future. You know what? We are in the month of July right now. This is probably more appropriate to do this week as opposed to 2 weeks from now, but you know what? It's WCW. Nothing makes sense. We're going to look at Great American Bash 1995 next. I'm Brian Zane, and I'll see you next time.